what fun it is to join me on this video for blood vessels. Unfortunately, we're not going to be in the lab with the models and with the kitties, but it's still important that we get through these blood vessels. So this is Dr. Jenkins. It's pretty important that you take the time to learn these vessels, and I want to make your time on this video worth it. So this is going to be the best ever explanation of blood vessels. Are you ready? I hope so. All right, so I'm going to walk you through a way that I think it's easiest to learn these blood vessels. If you try and learn all these blood vessels at once, it's going to be very difficult. So I've put together kind of a plan. Start here, after you learn that, then learn this, then learn this, and so forth. And I think it lays it out pretty well. To start off, I usually talk about back in the early 90s, Clint Malarchuk was a goalie for the Buffalo Sabres. One of his own players got upended, and the other player's skate happened to sever his neck, and he almost died had it not been for the quick care of the medical team. But just an idea here of how much blood we have and how important these blood vessels are. So here's the best explanation ever. I hope that you're ready. There are a lot of blood vessels to know. This is a 3-week lab, right? So you are going to have some time to go through this, but don't wait until the last minute. Do you hear me? I'm flailing my arms about. Do not wait until the last minute, because you will not be able to learn these all at once. Not only is there the whole body of blood vessels to learn, but we have arteries and veins, and sometimes they're different. So break this up. Maybe you decide the first week to do that, then do this, and then review with the cat. Have a plan, my friends. Otherwise, it's going to be very overwhelming, and you will not do well on the exam, the online exam, which, by the way, is going to include human and cat vessels. All right, in all seriousness, here we go. Before we even start this discussion, make sure that you review the basics of a circulatory route. And you probably got this in lecture, but I just want to make sure that we're clear. Most often, we have a simple circulatory route where the heart pumps out oxygenated blood. That's why it's shown as red, because the blood is oxygenated. Then that blood reaches a capillary bed somewhere in our body where oxygen goes out to the tissues and excess CO2 that is built up goes back into the tissues. Then that deoxygenated blood leaves the capillary bed, travels back up to the heart. And of course, what's in red are the arteries, and what's in blue are the veins. So that's how it works most of the time. However, there are some special cases. And the one that I want to talk about is a portal system, because we are going to talk about the hepatic portal system. A portal system is the same beginning. The heart pumps out oxygenated blood. But the key thing about a portal system is that there are 2 capillary beds. Normally, we only have 1 capillary bed. But in a portal system, that blood moves through 1 capillary bed, and then there's a portal vessel that takes that blood to a 2nd capillary bed. That's what makes a portal system unique. But then, after that 2nd capillary bed, the deoxygenated blood once again returns back to the heart via veins. There are only 2 portal systems in the blood. One of them we're going to be discussing in this very video, and that is the hepatic portal system. The other place where we have a portal system is between the hypothalamus in the brain and the pituitary gland that hangs down from it. It's called the hypothalamo-pituitary portal system, or hypophyseal portal system. You don't have to know that for now, but I just want to point it out. We are, like I said, we are going to be talking about the hepatic portal system. All right. So much fun to learn. Quick review before we even get started, because we already did this in the heart chapter, but you cannot forget it, my friends. We remember this is the only place in the body where the arteries and veins are reversed. Remember? The pulmonary arteries and trunk are shown as blue. Here's the pulmonary trunk coming out to the left pulmonary artery and right pulmonary artery. Only place in the body where an artery is blue, which means it's carrying deoxygenated blood. We remember why. It's still an artery because it's carrying blood away from the heart, but it just so happens to be carrying that blood to the lungs where it hasn't yet picked up oxygen. So it is deoxygenated. And then, on the other hand, we have the pulmonary veins, the only time when a vein is shown as red. It's a vein because it is carrying blood towards the heart, but in this case, it's carrying oxygenated blood because it just so happens to be carrying blood towards the heart from the lungs where it picked up oxygen. So you cannot forget this, even though you may want to. I mean, unless you don't want to do well on the quiz. But I think you want to do well on the quiz. All right, here we go. Dr. Jenkins' best ever explanation of human blood vessels. We're going to start by looking at the vessels around the heart. And this is where I suggest you start. So first, you're going to see in this video, anything that is an artery is shown as red. An artery means it's carrying blood away from the heart. And that blood that is being carried away from the heart is oxygenated. The aorta, we already talked about the aorta because we saw it in the heart. But that same aorta vessel, even though it's the same vessel, it changes names based off of location. And this is something that we're going to see later as well. But here's our first example. The very first region of the aorta is called the ascending aorta. And it's called the ascending aorta because look at the direction of blood flow. The blood is moving in an ascending or up direction. The next part of the aorta is considered to be the aortic arch because it is an arch shape. Then that aorta goes behind the heart, and we can see it shown here. When it goes behind the heart here, it is called the descending thoracic aorta. But once we cross past the diaphragm, that same aorta becomes a descending abdominal aorta. So it's the same vessel, it just changes names based off of where it is. This is all memorization, okay? So you'll probably want to watch this video over and over again, or maybe, if you don't want to hear my voice over and over again, stop and pause it. And then just memorize, okay? Go over it again and again and again and again. And then the next day, go over it again and again. Okay, after you've mastered that, we're going to talk about the aortic arch only. So if we focus only on the aortic arch, there are 3 arterial branches coming off of it. Going from the person's right to left, we have the brachiocephalic artery, left common carotid artery, and left subclavian artery. Remember, right and left is what it would be on that person. So if this was someone's actual heart, we can see the right and left side. So the ascending aorta leads into this is kind of not written that well, leads into the aortic arch. And coming off the aortic arch, memorize these 3 branches. Think about some way to memorize B for brachiocephalic, C for common carotid, and S for subclavian. I still am a college football fan, so it used to be the Bowl Championship Series. You come up with, sometimes a little saying, big cookies, sometimes, I don't know, whatever. If you can think about a way to remember it, that will be good. Now, what we're going to find later is that in the cat, there are not 3 branches coming off the aortic arch, only 2. But we're going to review that later. My suggestion to you is to learn the human first. All right, dramatic pause, because I want you to pause and memorize, memorize, memorize. After we establish the 4 parts of the aorta, the 3 branches coming off of the aortic arch, now we can follow the arteries up to the head. And these are the carotid arteries. Okay? We have, coming off the aortic arch, actually, the left common carotid. So actually, one of these comes directly off of the aortic arch. Suffice to say that common carotid on both the right and the left side goes up towards the neck and the head, and then the common carotid artery is going to split. The continuation of the carotid artery is the external carotid artery. So it's like the same vessel. It's just that here it's called the common carotid artery, but after the internal branch is off, from here up, it's called the external carotid artery. And we can see here the branch coming off of the common carotid. I had to use a lighter font here. So this is the internal carotid coming off. All right, so if I was going to draw it, let me do red because we're doing arteries. It would be the common carotid artery. Again, there's going to be one on the right and left side. You also might want to get in the habit of labeling them as artery or veins. And then the common carotid artery has a split, and one of those vessels goes more internal, while the common carotid continues up. The part that branches off internally is called the internal carotid artery, while the part that just keeps going up after the branch becomes the external carotid artery. You will get these, you just have to memorize, memorize, memorize. You have access to this PowerPoint, so plenty of pictures for you to review with. Some people like this view because it shows you differently. Personally, I prefer to see it on the actual human picture, but some people like this because they can see the ascending aorta, aortic arch, descending thoracic, descending abdominal. Oh yeah, 3 branches coming off the aortic arch: brachiocephalic, left common carotid, left subclavian. Oh right, and if I follow the common carotid up, it's then going to become the internal and the external. So use whatever resources you want. Now, we haven't even started talking about veins, have we? Oh, but the fun continues. So anytime you see blue, that's going to refer to veins. And that means that the blood is moving towards the heart. Remember, these vessels are only one-way streets, and they're carrying blood that is deoxygenated. All right? So this is going to be simple. If the heart, they've kind of taken it out here, but the heart's right here. We know the veins already because we know this from the heart chapter. We have the superior vena cava, and actually, to be more accurate, only that part is the superior vena cava. Superior vena cava, because it's superior, and then this is the inferior vena cava. So you'll start there. Okay, cool, veins around the heart, I got it. Superior vena cava drains blood from the upper body into the heart. Inferior vena cava drains blood from the lower body and the gut into the heart. And what about the head? Well, For the arteries, we had the common carotid, external carotid, and internal carotid. For veins, we have the jugulars. And we see here we have two branches coming up. The first one that comes off is the internal jugular. And the second one is the external jugular. And they're on both sides. So if I was going to answer this one that I've already labeled, I would say left internal jugular, solid lines, and left external jugular, dotted line. You can see these are going to start to add up. So that's why I'm saying do not wait until the last minute. But if you follow this plan and you memorize it in pieces and you spend enough time, you will not falter in Dr. Jenkins's best explanation ever of the blood vessels. Before we move on, I do want to point out one specific vein in the thorax, and it's called the azygos vein. It's actually right here. And this vein is important because it drains from the diaphragm muscle. So I'd like you to know both of these. Why it's important is because it drains from the diaphragm and the intercostal muscles, which we need for breathing. So other peripheral veins may not be life-threatening if there's an injury. I mean, of course, the jugulars would be, yes. But I'm saying, there are many peripheral veins that our body can maneuver around, or we can find a way even if there's damage to it. But the azygos vein is really important because it drains from the diaphragm. And in order to be able to breathe, we have to be able to deliver blood, and we have to be able to drain blood from the diaphragm and intercostal muscles. Again, if you like the flow chart, here it is for the veins. We are going to keep moving on though. Already we're on step number 3. Again, take your time, folks. But when you're ready, upper body blood vessels. Let's do arteries first. Now, the good thing about the arteries and veins of the upper limb is that they're largely the same. So once you memorize this list, you aren't going to have to do much more to learn the veins. Okay? Let's just start with the arteries though. So we are looking at a person's right side, right? So we know we have 3 branches coming off the aortic arch. Remember, we can't forget that. So our 3 branches are the brachiocephalic, left common carotid, and left subclavian. We're looking only at the right side. So we're going to follow that brachiocephalic artery. Remember, so the brachiocephalic is right as it comes off the aortic arch. Here is another case where it's the same vessel, it just changes names. It starts off as brachiocephalic artery. Then it becomes subclavian artery when it passes through, underneath the clavicle. Subclavian means, sub means under, clavicle means clavicle. So when that same vessel, right, it's coming up and it's going to come all the way down. So it's initially the same vessel, it just changes names. Initially coming off of the aortic arch, it is brachiocephalic artery. Then when we get to go underneath the clavicle, it's called subclavian. Then when we get to the armpit area or the axillary area, it becomes the axillary artery. Axillary is a regional term for underneath the arm, the armpit. So just think about axillary armpit, subclavian under the clavicle. And then when we get to the arm, that's brachial. That shouldn't be a surprise. We know the brachial artery runs right down the middle of the arm. When we get to the forearm, we're going to have the ulnar artery and the radial artery. Now some of these arrows aren't quite right with the picture. I'm not sure how that happened. but we can just label it ourselves. We know that the thumb side is radial. So the vessel I've labeled there is radial artery. And then the vessel on the pinky side would be the ulnar artery. Seems like a lot at first, yes, but when you spend enough time, you will get it. Okay, brachiocephalic artery becomes subclavian, becomes axillary in the armpit, becomes brachial in the arm, and then it branches into a radial artery on the thumb side and an ulnar artery on the pinky side. But you might be thinking ahead. What if I'm on the left side? Remember, we have to remember the 3 branches coming off of the aortic arch. The scenario that we just went through was appropriate for the right side because we have the brachiocephalic artery coming off the aortic arch. But then we have the left common carotid, and then we have left subclavian. So that means on the left side, there is no brachiocephalic artery. And the way you're going to know that is because you're going to go back to the 3 branches coming off of the aortic arch. Brachiocephalic, left common carotid, left subclavian. So that way, if I have to go out to the arm on the left side, there is no brachiocephalic. So initially, coming off the aortic arch, it is subclavian. And then the rest is the same. It's going to become axillary, brachial, radial, and ulnar. This is why I'm delivering this information in steps. Because as you go through them further and further, you're going to be helped because you knew the previous steps. Now, I mean, come on. This is anatomy and physiology too, folks. So we really want to make sure you know this stuff. So not only are you going to be asked to identify these blood vessels by labeling them on pictures and drawings, but I may also, and if I say may, it pretty much means I will, I'm also going to ask you to trace blood. And this is a great example. What if I ask you to trace the path of blood from the heart to the right pinky? Stay with me here. What if I ask you to trace the path of blood from the heart to the pinky? Let's unpack that. The first thing you're going to identify is that if I'm asking you to trace blood from the heart out, are we talking about arteries or veins? If it's going away from the heart, we're talking about arteries. So then you automatically start thinking about arteries. If I'm asking you to trace the blood flow from the heart out to the, I forget what I said, but let's just say it's right side. If I said trace the path of blood from the heart to the right pinky, then you're going to go here. Brachiocephalic, subclavian, axillary, brachial to the pinky, ulnar. If it was to the left side, you would make a list, but you would start with left subclavian artery. You wouldn't put brachiocephalic because that would be incorrect. So if I asked you to trace the path of blood from the heart to the left pinky, you would write heart, left subclavian artery, left axillary artery, left brachial artery, left ulnar artery. All right, the fun is just going to continue, folks. Again, if you like this view of the flowchart, there it is for you. What about the veins? Well, I already introduced them because they're very much going to be similar. The starting point is different. Instead of the aorta, the starting point is going to be the superior vena cava. Now, it's true, blood's going to move from the arm back up. So even though that's the path that blood takes, I actually still think it's easiest to list it from the heart going out, even though that's really not how it works. So I'm going to list the veins from the heart going out, even though I know the direction of blood flow is actually the opposite. All right, so working our way from the heart out, we would have the superior vena cava. And guess what, folks? It splits. And I forgot to put one on here. How could I have done that? Because I'm human, just like you. So the inferior vena cava comes up, and you might see this superior. What's wrong with me? Superior vena cava comes up, and then it splits. Splits off into a right and a left brachiocephalic. So this would be left brachiocephalic vein. So you don't have to worry about 3 branches coming off the aortic arch. In this way, for the veins, it's the same on both sides. Superior vena cava comes up, and it splits off into a left and a right brachiocephalic. Then it becomes subclavian underneath the clavicle. Then it becomes axillary in the armpit. Then it becomes brachial in the arm. And then, of course, we're also going to have radial and ulnar. So this, my friends, is the same list as for the arteries. Brachiocephalic, subclavian, axillary, brachial, radial, ulnar. Same for arteries and veins. However, there's a couple additional veins to know. In addition to the ones that we've already talked about, there's a couple extra that I would like you to know. And we're talking about the arm. So we're not really talking about closer to the heart. Once we get to the arm, the brachial vein runs right down the middle of the arm. So the dotted line I put is meant to indicate the brachial vein running down the center of the arm. Now we're going to add. We have what's called the basilic vein and the cephalic vein. If the brachial vein runs down the middle of the arm, the cephalic vein is on the lateral side. And the basilic, even though it labels it down here, it's also called a basilic up here. So the basilic vein is more medial. All right, so in the arm, the brachial vein runs down the middle. And we're going to add 2 additional veins to know. The cephalic vein runs more lateral in the arm, and the basilic vein runs more medial in the arm. There's a way that I always remember basilic. I think about BO, like someone stings, body odor, because medial is closer to the armpit. Again, we have these silly ways that can stay with us for many, many years. And believe me, it's stuck with me many, many years. And lastly, we have a vessel. Let me just switch to green so we can see it better. We have a vessel called the median cubital vein. And this basically runs between the basilic and the cephalic, but more importantly, that median cubital runs right over the front crease or the antecubital area of your elbow. And this is the vein that will often be tapped when someone, a nurse or whomever, takes blood or puts in an IV. All right. Good work, everyone. Learn it in tiny pieces. And here's another flow chart if you'd like. All right, I'm going to pause the video and we'll finish part 1 here. We're covering a lot. So once you finish this part 1 and you're ready, go ahead and skip ahead to part 2, where we're going to finish off with the vessels of the gut, which includes discussion of the hepatic portal system, and we'll talk about the lower extremity.